No, we'll go ahead. We'll go ahead. This will help. This will help explain. But I'm going to talk about Paul and James and Abraham here in a little bit and how this all fits, right? Because one of the big things you have to navigate constantly in doing biblical interpretation is the whole balance of faith and works, right? How that fits together, right? There's no way. I mean, you confront it all the time. It is a gigantic issue in all biblical interpretation, but it's hardwired into the big picture. And the reason this is important to put this big picture together is you're going to run across text after text after text after text that has to do with faith and obedience. And we have two choices. We can just kind of put it together piecemeal, bit by bit by bit, or we can think about how does it plug into the larger story. And I think once you see it plugged in the larger story, it starts to make sense. And becomes not an easy issue, but far less complicated than we make it with all sort of our talk and double talk and everything else. The key is in the context of Abraham, right here. And we skip it because we're not all that, we might be familiar with Genesis 12, Genesis 15, Genesis 17, where the sign of circumcision is given, and then Genesis 22 with Abraham and Isaac and the sacrifice. Right, or the idea of it anyway. We're not as familiar with the stuff that happens between. However, what happens in chapter 18 is absolutely 100, let's make it sports, 110% vital for your understanding of how faith and works fit together in the Bible. Even in the so-called unconditional covenant with Abraham. Now, we might be familiar with chapter 18 because it's where Abraham has this sort of parlay, right, with God, and he goes back and forth, about if he'll spare Sodom, for this number of people, but there's something in here that gets ignored all the time, but it's absolutely it solves so many issues, and it's right here. In verse 16 of chapter 18, they're getting ready to leave. They look down to Sodom, and Abraham's walking along. Then the Lord says, now, I need you to do me a favor. I can't make you do this, but I'm asking you. I'm asking you not to read it right now. I'm asking you to take your eyes off of it and only listen, or stop reading when I ask you to stop. Okay? Because it's important that we take this step by step and really listen to the power of it. Now, what's just happened? In literary time, this has just happened, right? Just a couple of chapters earlier, 3 chapters earlier or so, right? And so in a literary, time, it's not that long ago, God's made this covenant and said, hey, I'm going to keep my promises. I'm going to make you a great nation. Remember all the promises, right? So you got all those in your mind. Then God says, verse 17, shall I hide from Abraham what I'm about to do? Question. Since Abraham will surely become a great and powerful nation, and all the nations on earth will be blessed through him. Stop right there. Don't read. Okay. So, God says what? Should I hide this from Abraham? After all, he's going to be a great nation. And all the nations on earth will be blessed through him. Right? So this is the third time one of those things has been repeated. The second time the other thing has been repeated just since Genesis 12. Right? I guess maybe 3 times each. It doesn't even matter. It's a repetition of the covenant promises that cannot be broken. Right? Am I right? I'm right. And so God says, shall I hide this from Abraham since I am in a relationship with him that cannot be broken? It is in the bank. There is no doubt Abraham is going to become a great nation. Why is there no doubt? Because I promised it, and I'm God. Right? Does everybody agree with that assessment? Okay. You sure? 100%? I'm not trying to trap you. 110%. Right? For sports fans. Got to give 110%. Last chance you. Okay. I have to do some editing. Okay, so anyhow. Verse 19, for I have chosen him, get ready. so that he will direct his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing what is right and just. Now look, so that, it says, so that the Lord will bring about for Abraham what he's promised him. Which one is it? Read that again. Read that again. For I have chosen him so that, I've chosen, remember, promise in the bank. It's all Abraham's. God's going to do it. No doubt about it. Absolutely no questions. It's coming his way. Nothing's going to get in the way of it. This promise is going to be fulfilled no matter what happens. And everybody is totally in agreement with that. And God said it and we believe it. Now, look what God says. To keep the way of the Lord by doing what is right and just. Look at the next two words. What are the next two words? So that the Lord will bring about for Abraham what he has promised him. Which is it? Is it conditional or not? Is it unconditional or not? Do you understand? Do you understand the significance and power? And I don't mean that in a condescending way. Do you understand, are you grasping the significance and the power of that little phrase, so that? What does so that mean? In like just if you use it. Result. Right? I'm going to take an umbrella so that I don't get wet when it rains. What happens if I don't take an umbrella? I'm going to get wet. Now, what if I already have a promise behind me somewhere that you will never get wet again? Ever. For the rest of your life. You will never get wet. Ever. I don't care if there's a second flood. You will remain dry. While all else goes around, okay, I know there can't be a second flood, it's promised, but obviously I'm making something up here, okay? So don't go haywire. But what if I have this promise? You will never ever be wet again. I guarantee it. If you're ever wet again, may I personally drown, the one giving me the promise. If you ever get wet, I'll be drowned on the spot. That's how much I'm guaranteeing your dryness from now on. And then later I find out, and that promise is to me and my kids. Then later I find out that my daughter is going to stay dry if I teach her to do the right thing, that is carry an umbrella. So I might turn around and say, which is it? Is it a promise to stay dry forever? Or is it telling me you better get an umbrella? Well, here's the thing. God makes a promise that will not be broken, and He provides that there will be means for the inheritance of that promise. That is, the people of God will inherit the promise, but they must be the people of God who do justice and righteousness. In other words, God's not going to fulfill His promise willy-nilly with a bunch of pagans. Do you understand? So God, that's either what's going on or God's speaking out of both sides of His mouth. It's been either that or you got a bait and switch here. You know what a bait and switch is, right, in retail? Like you see an ad in the paper that says, come on down and you get 2 for 1. You find out that you don't really get 2 for 1. It's only if you buy like a certain item that you get 2 for 1 on something you don't even want. So they bait you into the store and then switch the deal on you. Well, in this text, this is not a bait and switch. This is God saying, yeah, I'm fulfilling this without a doubt. And you know what? I'm going to fulfill it with a particular kind of people. People who do justice and righteousness. Now, that doesn't work their way, they don't work their way into the covenant that way, but this is the first installment of, I will be their God and they will be my people. And they will walk before me and be blameless. And things like, I will write my law up on their heart and they will obey me. This is the first installment of that. This is absolutely vital for understanding the place of faith and works in the Bible and how they and how they fit together. Do you understand? Now, I can take a minute for questions on this before I go any further. Yes? That's a great question. The question is it unconditional for Abraham but conditional for his children? No, it isn't. It isn't. What it's saying is this. Paul later is going to say something like this. He's going to say, not all Israel is Israel. It turns out that when God says It's going to get more specific. When God says, I'm going to keep my word and keep my promise and you're going to be a great nation, it's going to be a particular kind of people who inherit this nation. That is, people who do justice and righteousness. And then it's going to turn out, it turns out to be people who believe that God is who he says he is. So the way I like to put it is this. This is God saying to Abraham, I'm going to keep my word, but I'm making my word with a particular sort of people. I'm not giving my word to people who are pagans, who don't live for me, who live outside of my covenant, who don't obey me, who don't please me, who don't do things that I think are good, who aren't on my side, that kind of thing. Do you see what I mean? So I think that's what it's doing. So it's not all of a sudden, aha, I knew there was hidden print, now I've got to do something. No, you don't. No, you don't. It's just God is going to fulfill it, and that's not unreasonable. It's not unreasonable. It's like this. In that context, it's like, just put it this way. You can't serve God and Baal. Can you? Can you? You can't. So if you're serving Baal, do you have any assurance that this unconditional promise is yours? No, you don't. And nobody thinks that's unreasonable. When we apply these things to Israel, we think, well, of course you can't give sacrifices one day and then run up to the high places and offer sacrifices hoping you'll get better crops the next year from the other gods, like an Asherah pole or Baal or whatever you got. Of course we'd say you can't serve God and Baal. You have to choose this day who you're going to serve. We're totally on board with that. All you got to do is be on board with that, and you can understand Genesis 18. God keeps his word with a particular kind of people. Now, hang on to that, because the answer is coming in Deuteronomy for how that's going to work. So if you're thinking, so it is kind of God does his bit and I do my bit, and you put together God's best with your, there's something that I've forgotten. I shouldn't even have said it. There's a little ditty that really just ruins the theology of the Bible. But it's not as though God does his part, you come along, do your little part, and God says, hey, nice try. You show me something, I'm going to help you out because you did your bit. It never becomes that. Because we find out more and more and more how it is that people are going to achieve and be this just and righteous people. Because God's going to provide what he commands. I'm letting the cat out of the bag a little bit. So we'll see that when we get to the story of Israel. Yes? The question is, could it be described as God classifying his covenant? What do you mean? I guess just clarifying. Yeah. I think it's probably, it does clarify and define what the people on the other side of the covenant look like. Yeah, that's all it is. But it's really important to see that dramatic language in chapter 18. So that, I've promised it, but he'll teach us so that they'll inherit the promise. So there is an inseparable, instrumental connection between the doing of justice and righteousness and receiving the covenant. There is an instrument involved. And we'll see this. The Bible is filled with instrumentation for how God does things. At no point does God just Shazam people into realities, as if that's a thing, right? And I can prove that we all believe in means of God doing things. Does anybody in here, you don't have to raise your hand. If you have ever prayed for anyone, if you have ever shared the gospel with anyone, if you have ever preached, if you have ever counseled, if you've ever prayed for yourself, you believe then, whether you realize it or not, that God uses means for his own divine ends, and you don't have a problem with it. Can God then not do this at every level? He does. There is going to be, but we'll see, God also provides the means when it comes to our salvation. Right? So this is why I'm still in Genesis after 3 weeks, but everything that we hold to about faith and works hinges on how we understand these early chapters. And if you have an understanding of these, you have then a way of interpreting, and it's a constant sort of navigating the waters in virtually every text you preach. When you come down to applying it, sort of drawing the line between faith and works and how they work together. And are they two different things? Are they the same thing? How do they fit? So, perennial question. Perennial question. And now's the time, and has already passed, for us to stop giving just pat answers that don't satisfy anybody about it, because we're trying to uphold something when the Bible actually teaches us all we need to know about it.